Welcome back to Fox News at Night, reporting tonight from Dallas, Texas. Well, new tonight, signs of a new era of cooperation militarily and economically between China and Russia. And their apparent common goal is pushing back on President Trump. Today, the rise in U.S.-Russia tensions was evident in the Philippine Sea, where the U.S. Navy says a Russian destroyer accelerated toward a U.S. warship and almost collided with it, saying the Russian destroyer came about 50 to 100 feet within the USS Chancellorsville. Well, the Russian military is blaming the U.S. warship for suddenly changing course. The Washington Examiner opining tonight President Trump must respond to the aggressive action by the Russian destroyer in the Philippine Sea on Friday. And, of course, this follows some action between the planes on Tuesday in the Mediterranean Sea. So let's talk about it now. Former Senate Foreign Relations Committee staffer Jamil Jaffer and former national security lawyer for the Bush administration, John Yoo. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thanks, Shannon.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so Tom Rogan writing that piece in the Examiner saying that the president has to respond to this aggressive action. John, what can he do? What should he do?
First, we got to keep our eye on the fact that China is the rising power here, and they are using their economic might and their growth to build out a Navy that's challenging us in the Pacific. What the Trump administration should do, which I think the Obama administration refused to do, is to take offensive measures. Those don't have to just be sending naval vessels to challenge Russian and Chinese ships in the South China Seas. That could also be things like cyber attacks, cyber offense. I think what we've done for a long time is we've been on the defensive. We've just been suffering attack after attack without doing anything in response. We've only been encouraging the Chinese and the Russians to continue to attack and stealing secrets. And I think the United States has to go on the offensive, especially when offense is cheap, as it is in the cyber world, and defense is very expensive and not foolproof.
And so President Xi has been having this state visit in Russia with President Putin. Putin then making these comments, as reported by Reuters in St. Petersburg, saying this, seemingly directed at the U.S., says states which previously promoted free trade with honest and open competition have started speaking the language of trade wars and sanctions, of open economic raiding using arm twisting and scare tactics. He went on to add, it's a path to endless conflicts, trade wars, and maybe not just trade wars. Jamil, what do you make of that?
I mean, it's laughable, Shannon, right? You've got a leader of a country that that regularly extorts states in Eastern Europe with its control over natural gas. You've got on the other side of it, China, a country that's used its economic position, its theft of American intellectual property to build its economy. This idea that those two are getting together and accusing us of bad behavior in trade, it's laughable on its face, Shannon.
Well, the Washington Post puts it this way. They say the Trump administration's trade war and its campaign against Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei, that's a whole other conversation, is providing Russia with a new opportunity to win over China by casting the United States as a shared adversary. John, how worried should we be about that? I mean, President Xi referring to President Putin as his, quote, best friend.
First of all, it's not Russia attracting China over. The real opponent, the real long-term threat to our national security is China. Russia is the weaker power here. Russia, Senator McCain used to say Russia is just a gas station with nuclear weapons. They don't have much of an economy. Their population is shrinking. They just have a legacy of nuclear weapons, and they just export oil. So actually, the thing for the United States to do is try to draw Russia back towards the West, as it used to be in the 90s, and try to isolate China. But we shouldn't allow the Chinese tail to wag everything. We really should remain focused on China and what's doing. As Jamil said, China is trying to organize countries to fight back against the world of open, free trade and democracies that the United States has fostered and protected. We want to split China and Russia apart, but mostly to isolate China, not Russia.
Okay, so Jamil, how does this now frame the entire conversation that our president is having with Chinese officials about trade, tariffs, all of these very delicate conversations that are ongoing?
Well, look, I think John is exactly right that China is the long-term player here. They're the real threat. That being said, I'm not sure I agree that we ought to try and bring Russia back in. Russia has been an inveterate bad actor. Vladimir Putin is an unresolved KGB apparatchik. He is not a serious ally of the United States. There's no chance he can be. And frankly, I'm surprised the president continues to repeat the mistakes of President Obama for the last 8 years of trying to reset relations with Russia. I agree with John that we should focus on China, but pulling Russia in our orbit just isn't going to work, and they're not doing it.
Okay, so as I mentioned at the outset, we have the situation now with the two warships potentially, colliding or being closer than they should have been in the waters. Then over in the Mediterranean, in the skies, we have reports this week that there were 3 interactions in a 3-hour period between U.S. and Russian fighter jets that were potentially troublesome. I mean, all of that is happening publicly. Major General Vladimir Bogotrayev, the chairman of the National Association of Reserve Officers, says this: "It's not by chance that these actions happened during the visit to Russia by the head of the People's Republic of China." John?
Well, this is Putin playing his typical games, trying to use their military strength, which is still one of their advantages, to show China they're still worth something. What they're asking China to do is invest lots of money into Russia. And Russia is basically saying, look, we're not just a basket case. We can help you push back on the United States in the Pacific. So what they do is they try to engage in basically a game of chicken with our reconnaissance planes, with our naval vessels. It is illegal for their vessels to come that close to us, but they try to dare and push our ships around as a show of force, even though we all know that if there ever actually were a war, Russia would have no chance against our Navy or against our Air Force. But they want to show that they're reckless and dangerous enough that they might be some value for China.
Well, we're going to leave it there for tonight. We will watch in the coming days. The state visit is wrapping up, but the tensions are far from over. Jamil and John, thank you both very much. Great to have you.